Nowhere to Hide. I'm Brian Hyde, and today we're going to be talking about how the mask is slipping. Look, it's an election year, and you would think that Republican legislators would be voting like Republican legislators, but they're not. And I've got some stunning examples of how their actions and words aren't adding up, even though it's a year that they might be held accountable. Details in just a few moments.
Bias, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Once again, welcome to Nowhere to Hide. We have a problem in that legislators in Idaho, they talk the talk. In fact, they make a very good case for, oh, look, I'm a conservative Republican, right up until it's time for them to govern. And then they hope that you're looking the other direction. In fact, it has been a very interesting week in the Idaho legislature where a number of key bills have failed. And it's not because of public outcry so much as taking care of their cronies, at least on the part of some legislators. I wanted to show you this tweet that Lauren had sent out here that really describes the strangeness that we're seeing. Something has shifted this Idaho session. Generally, legislators that claim to be Republican vote more conservatively on election years because they don't want to lose their seats. But this year is the opposite. They've pulled the mask all the way off and publicly, intentionally have killed things like school choice, preventing tyranny of health districts, stopping tax dollars to illegals. On the floor, they voted against stopping illegal immigration and ranked choice voting fixes. They came close to sabotaging a more transparent budget process. They are spending your money on a corrupt Department of Health and Welfare, expanding its services, spending your money on a completely failing Department of Education. She says, I can't tell if they understand they're going to lose their job, so they're shoving every liberal policy at us, or if they feel emboldened by the corporate powers and left-leaning organizations that support them, so they consider themselves infallible. But she says, Idaho needs a reckoning. And that is definitely the truth. So let's get into some of the specifics. And I want to thank the Idaho Conservative Caucus or Idaho Freedom Caucus rather, for checking each one of these and giving us an example of what it means when too many Republican lawmakers vote like Democrats. So this is from a Substack entry. Dear Idaho, you aren't conservative. And these are just a few of the things here. First, there was House Joint Memorial 11 to hold President Biden and the federal government accountable for the invasion at the southern border. This failed on the House floor. Now, conservative states stand up for the rule of law rather than illegal immigrants and the corporations that employ them, but Idaho lawmakers rejected a resolution calling for securing the border and holding our government accountable for those or for facilitating the invasion on our southern border. HJM 11 failed in the House 34 to 2. And I'm going to show you the ones in red. Those who voted in red voted in favor of illegal labor coming across our borders without permission. Now, ostensibly, they did it because they're helping, these great big, companies, the dairymen in Idaho and others. But isn't that interesting? Look how many. We'll get into this here in a moment as to how many Republicans seem to always consistently vote Democratic. Then there was H572 to prohibit universal basic income. This was sent from the Senate Affairs Committee to Senate amending orders. Conservative states don't support free money in the form of universal basic income. The idea is pure socialism. Basically, you're paying people not to work. In Idaho, lawmakers rejected H572, a bill to ban universal basic income. It's keeping that foot in the door, I guess, for the socialists. That's a government program in which every adult citizen receives a set amount of money regularly. Now, of course, you and I understand that nothing comes to you from government without a few strings attached. And so, yeah, you'll get a regular deposit in your account. And if you're a good boy or a good girl, we'll even allow you to access it. How's that for magnanimous? Anyway, here's the next one. We'll let this catch up here for just a moment. All right, it looks like the slideshow itself is not cooperating here for a moment, so we'll give it just a second to catch up. But the bottom line here is you have legislators who either sit on very important committees or they hold important positions, and yet they really struggle to toe the line. And we're told, well, it's because these extremists have come along and they've changed the rules, right? No, the rules that have been changed is the people who normally would be trusted to safeguard the citizens, the taxpayers' money and safeguard their God-given rights is instead considering themselves a partner with their corporate or special interest partners who always seem to come with a nice, generous donation to keep them in power. That is a problem. Here's another one that failed. This is HJR 4, a constitutional amendment to ensure the candidate who receives the most votes is the election winner. One person, one vote. That's all this is codifying. Failed on the House floor because it required 2/3 yes vote to pass. Now, conservative states believe in the concept of one person, one vote. This has been the way that elections have been held in our country since the beginning. It's the simplest, most direct way of electing the people's representatives. In Idaho, lawmakers rejected HJR 4, a constitutional amendment to codify one person, one vote into our highest law. In fact, many Republicans have gone on record supporting the ranked choice voting initiative. One can only surmise the reason that they're doing that is because they know that they can't make it if they're trying to actually run on conservative Republican principles. This is the voting on HJR 4. And again, you've got a lot of Republicans crossing over with Democrats. Here's one that I know they were celebrating as a great win. S1234 requires insurers to expand their contraceptive coverage. This passed the House floor. Conservative states don't micromanage insurance companies. That's according to the Idaho Freedom Caucus. Conservatives believe in the free market and the ability of consumers to make and hopefully pay for their own choices. In Idaho, lawmakers passed a Democrat bill, S1234, endorsed by Planned Parenthood to force insurers to reimburse 6 months of contraception at a time. Here's Planned Parenthood's tweet. Well, they made us sweat, but SB 1234, which would allow Idahoans to receive up to 6 months of birth control at a time, was sent to the House floor with a do-pass recommendation today. We couldn't have done it without you. They are talking to Republican members of the legislature who nonetheless, I guess, appreciate and support Planned Parenthood. Here's a big one. This one really had a lot of people within the status quo afraid. And it was the idea that we have a parental choice tax credit that would in fact help bolster the concept of school choice. Conservative states support school choice. Arizona, Iowa, Florida, Indiana, and Texas all give parents and families options for tax money to follow the children rather than being locked into a one-size-fits-all system. And I would add a failing one-size-fits-all system if we're talking about Idaho's public school system. In Idaho, lawmakers rejected H447, the softest school choice bill, because the public school bureaucracy owns them. I mean, it was killed in committee, not even allowed to see the light of day because it was a threat to the status quo. Well, you can have a choice as long as it's within the public school system, or so we hear from various politicians and special interests. What about school choice for parents? I mean, look, it may be dead for this legislative session. I don't think it's a dead issue, though. Oh, and those voting no included, John Weber, also Dick Cheatham, Jeff Cornelius, Melissa Durant, Stephanie Mickelson, Gerald Raymond, and Kenny Roten. Just in case you were wondering, who, by the way, is in the hip pocket of the public school establishment. I like this observation too. Idaho House and Senate Democrats said, well, Idaho State Representative Ned for Idaho discusses how the Idaho House Tax and Revenue Committee narrowly voted today to stop what they call School Voucher Bill H447. The bill would have siphoned $50 million from public schools. Yes, and put it to good use in private hands, choosing what's best for their kids. However, Brian Allman, I think, has the best take on this. Democrats and Republicans who vote like them use the word voucher for any and every school choice measure because it's the one word they've made scary to voters. I think he's right. They must have tested this at some focus group somewhere, and well, we can't find any magic pill, but voucher seems to be the word that they really don't like, so that's what we're going to do. Pathetic. Absolutely pathetic. All right, next up. Let's take a look at a couple of other things here. This is a big one. Idaho Senate Committee kills a bill to limit the all-encompassing power of health districts. Now, the no votes included Republican Abby Lee, who sided with Melissa Wintrow, who's a Democrat, as well as Ron Taylor. Yes votes were Carl Burke, also Glenita Zweiterveld, and Julie Van Orden. Senator Brian Lenny says it's a sad day, another sad day for Idaho, when a government political subdivision gets the green light on literal unlimited power. Now, you may ask yourself, well, what exactly were they trying to accomplish here? Well, in this case, This H525 would have restricted district boards of health to administer and enforce only essential and reasonable health laws and regulations. In other words, that carte blanche of that we're going to flip a switch and turn off the economy. We're going to lock down businesses. We're going to lock down churches. Oh, yeah, the lottery locations, the liquor stores. Yeah, we can keep those open. But the bottom line is, in conservative states, government agencies are not granted unlimited authority to shut down churches, schools, and businesses. In Idaho, lawmakers killed H525, a bill limiting the power of health districts, and it was killed in committee because a Republican joined two Democrats in opposition. See how that works? It didn't take a big majority. Oh, well, everybody's clearly against this. Nope. One person playing for the other team in committee has the power to shut those kind of things down. Now, the Institute for Legislative Analysis recently examined 56 key bills from the 2023 session of the Idaho legislature to see how our lawmakers self-identify by virtue of their positions. This is from an article in the Gem State Chronicle from just a couple of days ago. And while declared party affiliation in the legislature is 87 Republicans to 18 Democrats, the revealed preferences as expressed by actual votes make it 52 to 53. In other words, instead of Republicans making up 83% of the legislature, which their numbers would seem to uphold, they only make up ideologically just 49.5% of the legislature. And if you want to see what that looks like in a chart, well, this is basically what it looks like. The conservative voters are few and far between, but in that mushy middle, you've got a lot of Republicans who vote a lot like Democrats. And it's a problem, as you're seeing, because it can kill bills which actually keep government within its proper limits and which tightly control those powers so that they can't be used for abusive purposes. Just remember, the people who want to expand government power are not doing so because they're looking out for you and trying to solve your problems. What they're trying to do is make sure that their grip on power and access to taxpayer funding is uninterrupted. They and their cronies. Pretty sickening stuff, and it's really on display. Now, Brian Allman says, look, I think voter complacency is a big part of the problem. Reason being, in most Idaho districts, voters select a Republican in the general election without worrying about his or her ideological positions. And that's true. That's lazy voting. So when they say, well, we just want to make sure every voter's voice is heard, I don't know if I want every voter's voice to be heard, because some voters they're either underinformed or misinformed or flat wrong. Now, I want people who are smart voters to get out there, even if they don't see things the way that I do. But when we talk about low information voters, that is a huge problem. And that's why you have voters selecting, the Republican in the general election without really checking to see, what does this person stand for? What is his or her record? Tell me about the way that they vote. And of course, when in primary elections, the turnout is generally pretty low. Whichever candidate has name recognition, the most flyers, the most mailers, the most community support, often they win. So when people say, well, these elections are really won in the primary, that can be true. Candidates who promise to support big businesses like corporations that make up the Idaho Association of Commerce and Industry, the Farm Bureau, or healthcare lobbies can count on significant campaign contributions. What do you think those corporations expect in return? If you said policy that favors them, I would say that's probably right. Candidates who oppose those special interest groups have to work harder to raise money from individuals or the handful of liberty-minded political action committees at work in our state. Now, Brian Allman goes on to tell us, it's easy to see why this is the case. When members of IACI or the Idaho Dairymen's Association donate to potential legislators, they expect a return on that investment. And that return can be in the form of direct transfers from the taxpayer, such as the Idaho Launch Grant, or in protecting their foreign workforce, as with the defeat of HJM 11. On the other hand, what return do contributors to the Idaho Freedom PAC or Citizens Alliance get for their support? Maybe lower taxes or fewer regulations, but what they're paying for is something much more intangible, and that is a freer Idaho for them and their children. Kind of different when you put it in those contexts. So here's the bottom line. All 105 legislative seats are up for election this year. And Brian says it's vitally important to make an informed decision, not just in the November general election, but in the May primary as well. In many cases, you will have a choice between a Republican who is ideologically moderate or not ideological at all, and a conservative Republican who will support good legislation without fear of repercussions from IACI, Big Ag, the public sector unions, or any of the other special interests that exert outsized influence in Idaho politics. So again, this is a call not so much to tell you these are the specific candidates you need to vote for, but to encourage you as a voter, take that more seriously. And understand that just because, a particular candidate has an R next to their name, that doesn't mean that necessarily they are upholding the platform principles and planks of the Republican platform. And I'm not holding it up as it's the best thing since sliced bread. I'm just going to say, if a person is freedom-minded, if they understand the necessity of limited government, it's a pretty good place to start. It's a pretty solid platform. The problem is you have people who will give it lip service without actually towing the line. That is a huge problem, and it's only going to be solved by voters. So don't outsource this kind of governance to experts. Look, the experts have been wrong. It was the experts who locked down, our communities. It was the experts who told police to go out and ticket or arrest people for being out in public or being too close or not wearing masks or singing in a church parking lot. That happened here in Idaho. Now, if you're okay with that, or if that's something you want to enforce on people, well, just keep on doing business as usual. If, however, and I suspect this is more likely the case, you are someone who loves and appreciates freedom, it's time to redouble your efforts to really understand the principles and the practices on which it is based, to research those who actually support, not just with their words, but with their actions, those principles, and to get out there and work and to do what you can to help promote them. Now, you have allies in this fight. And, the Idaho Freedom Caucus is one of them. The Gem State Chronicle and the Gem State Substack, Brian Allman is another one of those excellent voices out there. The Idaho Tribune, the Idaho Freedom Foundation. You have people on your side. One of the ways you can tell who's on your side, just look at who's being demonized most by legacy media and by these politicians or former politicians who would really like to get their hands back on those levers of power. We've got a pretty heavy load in front of us, and it's an election year, so it's not something we can just wish away or outsource to somebody else. Let's get informed, let's get involved, and let's not reward the duplicitous double talk that unfortunately has allowed so many Republicans in name only to come into power here in the great state of Idaho. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
Bias, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot.
That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how